Good evening, and welcome. Tonight, we are not riding into battle. We are not following knights in shining armor, and we are not gazing at kings, queens, or their glittering courts. Instead, we are sitting by the fire, quietly, slowly, listening to the story of something far more ordinary, far more human, and yet something that shaped every single life in the Middle Ages. Food. Not the food of feasts or the banquets sung about by wandering poets, but the food of the ordinary day. The food that peasants placed on their wooden tables, the food that mothers stretched to feed hungry children, the food that kept people alive, barely, and sometimes failed them completely. You see, in the medieval world, food was not about pleasure. It was about survival. Meals were plain, repetitive, and often disappointing. And for most people, hunger was a daily companion. So tonight, as you listen, let your body grow heavy. Let your eyes close slowly. And let us drift back, century by century, to a time when life was hard and food truly sucked. If there was one food that defined the medieval diet, it was bread. But this was not the soft, fluffy bread you might picture today. It was rough, it was coarse, and sometimes it was barely edible. For the wealthy, bread was made from fine white wheat flour, soft, fragrant, and easier to chew. But for the vast majority, wheat was a luxury they could not afford. Most peasants ate bread made from rye or barley. The loaves were dark, heavy, and sour. Baked in communal ovens, they were shared among families, cut carefully so that each piece could last. And yet, bread was everything. It was breakfast. It was lunch. It was dinner. Without bread, there was no meal. Imagine a mother in a small stone cottage. She cuts a thick slice of dark bread for her children. The crust is hard, so hard it might chip a tooth. The inside is dense, chewy, and sour. She places it on the table, and the children eat in silence, their small hands clutching the bread as if it were treasure. In years of plenty, there was enough. But in years of famine, bread was stretched, altered, even corrupted. Flour was mixed with ground acorns, with beans, with peas, even with powdered tree bark. Anything to make the dough larger, anything to create the illusion of more food. But the taste, bitter, gritty, strange, was a reminder of hardship. And there was danger too. When rye was stored too long in damp barns, a fungus would grow, ergot, invisible to the eye, but deadly to the body. Those who ate the poisoned bread suffered visions, hallucinations, convulsions. Some called it the fire of Saint Anthony. Others thought it was witchcraft. In truth, it was simply hunger's cruel trick. But still, people ate, because they had no choice. Bread was not just food. It was survival. It was comfort, even in its harshest form. A loaf on the table meant one more day lived. And in the quiet nights of the Middle Ages, with stomachs never fully satisfied, people prayed for bread as much as they prayed for salvation. If bread was the heart of the medieval diet, then porridge and soup were its quiet companions. Picture a clay pot hanging over a smoky fire. Inside, water bubbles slowly. Grains, oats, or barley have been tossed in, sometimes cracked, sometimes whole. The liquid thickens, not into the creamy porridge you might imagine, but into something rougher, coarser, and far less appetizing. This was gruel. Thin, watery, sometimes sour. The poor ate it every day, morning and night. For peasants, meat was rare. Milk soured quickly. Cheese was saved for market. So the pot in the corner simmered endlessly, filled with whatever scraps could be spared. Turnips, cabbage leaves, onions, if there were any. A bone, long since stripped of its meat, boiled again and again until every drop of flavor was gone. It was called pottage, a dish without recipe, without rules. It changed daily, depending on what was found, grown, or begged. Some days it was rich with beans and herbs. Other days it was little more than hot water and wilted greens. Children sat with wooden bowls. Steam rose into their tired faces. They dipped crusts of old bread into the soup, letting the liquids soften the hard crusts. And they ate in silence, for food was too precious to waste with chatter. In wealthier households, soup and porridge took on new forms. Oats were sweetened with honey or dried fruit. Meat stock thickened into stews, and spices, precious imports from the East, added color and flavor. But even then, even in castles and monasteries, porridge was humble. It was filling, yes, it was practical, but it was never truly delicious. Imagine for a moment the rhythm of a medieval day. Dawn breaks. A family gathers around the pot. Each spoonful is taken slowly, carefully, for there may not be enough. At noon, the pot is stirred again, the grains swollen and tired. By evening, what remains is thin and sour, but still eaten, because hunger makes no complaints. Sometimes, porridge was made with peas or lentils. These legumes were cheap, and they kept well through the long winters. But they brought with them heaviness, and sometimes sickness. Peasants joked that a bowl of pea pottage was more filling than meat, because it sat in the stomach for hours, heavy and stubborn. Still, better heavy than empty. And so, porridge became more than food. It was a symbol of endurance. It was the meal that kept people alive through famines, through wars, through endless winters. But in truth, it was bland. It was repetitive. And after months of eating the same pottage, day after day, the thought of another bowl could break the spirit as much as it filled the belly. There is an old saying, "The poor man's table has 3 legs, bread, porridge, and hope." Hope because without it, the food alone was never enough. Close your eyes and imagine a medieval banquet. Perhaps you see long wooden tables, golden roasted meat, laughter, music, and overflowing platters. That image is true, but only for the very few. For kings, for lords, for bishops. For almost everyone else, meat was not daily food. It was rare. It was luxury. It was memory. The rarity of meat. In the countryside, peasants lived surrounded by animals. Pigs, chickens, cows, goats. Yet very few of those animals were ever eaten. A cow was too valuable for its milk. A chicken laid eggs. A sheep gave wool. To kill them for meat was to end the supply of something that could feed or clothe a family for years. So animals were slaughtered rarely, sometimes only once or twice a year. Usually, this happened in late autumn, when the cold weather made it easier to preserve meat with salt or smoke. Families came together, neighbors shared, and for a few short weeks, there was meat in the pot. The smell of pork fat sizzling in a pan, the taste of fresh sausage, it was joy, celebration, survival. And then it was gone. The rest of the year, people remembered that taste the way we might remember a festival long past. The wealth of the rich. In castles, monasteries, and noble estates, the story was different. Meat was constant. Venison from the hunt, wild boar caught in royal forests, geese, swans, and peacocks served with their feathers still on as decoration. The rich did not just eat to live, they ate to display power. Feasts were theater. A roasted pig with an apple in its mouth, a pie that, when cut, released live birds into the hall. Platters spiced with cinnamon, ginger, saffron, imports so costly that they were worth more than gold. But even here, even in the halls of plenty, the meat was often tough, salty, or spoiled. Without refrigeration, food had to be preserved, dried, smoked, salted. Fresh meat was rare, even for the lords. The ocean's gift. For the majority of people, fish was far more common than meat. The church played a role here. On many days of the year, Fridays, Lent, and countless holy festivals, meat was forbidden. Fish, however, was allowed. So rivers, lakes, and seas became lifelines. Eels slithered into pots. Herring, salted and packed in barrels, traveled from the coasts of Scandinavia to towns across Europe. Cod, dried into stiff planks, was traded across continents. For the poor, fish meant survival. But it was not the fresh, delicate fish you might imagine. It was dry. It was salty. It was hard as wood until boiled for hours. By the time it was ready, the taste was more of brine than of sea. Still, it filled the stomach. Still, it kept hunger away. Festivals and feasts. There were exceptions. At harvest time or on religious festivals, meat returned to the table of the peasant. A goose for Michaelmas, a pig for Christmas, perhaps a chicken for a wedding or a christening. These moments lit up memory. Children grew up remembering the crackle of roasting fat, the sweetness of rare meat, the laughter of neighbors sharing one table. But they were brief. The next day, the pot returned to its old companion, pottage and bread. The emotional weight of food. To eat meat was not just to taste richness, it was to feel security. To know, if only for one day, that the family was safe from hunger, that tomorrow might be kinder than yesterday. And so, meat was more than nutrition. It was hope. It was a dream placed on the tongue. For the poor, that dream faded quickly. For the rich, it was constant, but often dulled by overindulgence. Too much salted beef, too much heavy pork, too much of the same. Ironically, though peasants longed for meat, their diets of grains and vegetables often kept them healthier than lords, who suffered from gout, fevers, and illness brought by excess. In medieval times, the smell of roasting meat was rare for most, daily for few, and yet always powerful. It divided rich and poor more than walls or titles. It reminded people of survival, of family, of faith. To taste it was to remember life's sweetness. To lack it was to understand life's cruelty. Meat and fish, whether scarce or abundant, were never just food. They were symbols of hunger, of power, of hope. Morning light seeps softly through narrow windows and gaps in the thatched roofs. The village stirs gently, birds call faintly in the distance, and a thin mist hovers over the fields. Peasants rise slowly, stretching tired muscles, their feet touching the cold, uneven floor. Breakfast is simple, a small bowl of porridge or coarse bread, accompanied by a handful of boiled greens. The vegetables are bitter, earthy, strong, yet nourishing. Herbs, sage, thyme, rosemary float lightly above the meal, their aroma subtle, almost like a whisper. Children take small bites, grimacing at first, then slowly accepting the taste. Mothers hum soft tunes as they serve, and fathers eat quietly, chewing deliberately, savoring the warmth more than the flavor. As the day progresses, the sun climbs higher. Fields stretch in endless green, dotted with peasants bending, lifting, and sowing. Water from nearby streams glimmers in the light, and the wind carries faint scents of soil, herbs, and distant smoke. The midday meal was modest, stewed root vegetables, sometimes with a splash of watery broth. The taste is simple, sometimes bitter, but it keeps them going. Every bite is a quiet ritual of endurance. By evening, the kitchens are alive with gentle sounds, pots clinking, water boiling, herbs being chopped. The scent of cooked vegetables mingles with the soft smoke of the hearth. Families gather around small wooden tables. Conversation is minimal, words spoken softly, as though the day's fatigue has seeped into every corner. Dinner is again humble. Boiled greens, roots, and occasional herbs, bitterness mingling with warmth. Children's eyes grow heavy. Adults chew slowly, tasting the day's labor in every morsel. Outside, the wind rustles through the trees, a soothing lullaby.